Morning, good afternoon, everyone. I hope you can hear me okay. I'm very excited to join this panel today by two very distinguished speakers. So to start off with, I think I'll just start off with some numbers since I'm now in a data and analytics firm. According to IHS Markit, last year, when we look at only just the equity fund flows into, for example, the China market, it has gone up 78%. And now we have ESG funds that are claimed to be ESG aware or integrating ESG is $95 billion US. And into Hong Kong market, it was up 31% last year to $89 billion US. And in Singapore, there was 36% up as well. So a lot of excitement around fund flows that are looking for quality company that are sustainable business with good ESG disclosure. So this is the challenge now for companies. What do they need to disclose, and what is the framework that can help them to do that? And in order to answer those questions, let me introduce our distinguished speaker today. First is Grace Hui from, she is the head of Green and Sustainable Finance at the Hong Kong Stock Exchange. Hi, Grace. Prior to her appointment in April 2020, she was the Chief Operating Officer in the Listing Division. And we have Herry here. Hi, Herry. She is the head of sustainability and sustainable finance at the Singapore Stock Exchange. And prior to her appointment in February 2021, she was the director and head of sustainable finance Asia in ING Singapore. They are both responsible for driving the ESG ambitions of their respective exchanges and to strengthen their sustainable finance offerings. So may I start off with, I think it's Grace, to start off with, you have a presentation, is that right?
Yes, I do.
Please, go ahead, thank you.
Thanks, Christine, for the kind introduction, and happy Earth Day, everyone. I'm very pleased to be here and to be on the panel with Herry. My thanks to Ping An Technology and Imperial College Business School for inviting me. I would like to share a few slides with you on HKEX's ESG journey. Next slide, please. As you can see, ESG and sustainability have been core to our purpose as a listed corporate, market operator, and a market regulator. As a listed entity and corporate citizen, HKEX is fully aware of its role to lead by example. We are an active member of the UN Sustainable Stock Exchange. We have launched a new CSR strategy. We are vocal advocates of good governance, diversity, and financial literacy. And our London Metal Exchange, LME, has also introduced responsible sourcing requirements. HKEX is part of the Hong Kong Green and Sustainable Finance Cross-Agency Steering Group with other finance regulators and agencies. This group aims to coordinate the management of climate and environmental risks to the financial sector, accelerate the growth of green and sustainable finance in Hong Kong, and support the government's climate strategies. For example, the finance regulators of this group will take active steps to enhance climate-related disclosures of financial institutions and increase the coverage of mandatory TCFD, that's the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosures, by 2025, so that more information on how companies and assets will be impacted by climate change is available in the financial markets to support informed capital allocation and promote market discipline. This should be good news to the market, especially investors, as we aim to standardize disclosure of climate-related risks by all relevant sectors, including financial institutions, asset managers, insurers, and listed issuers. Finally, on this slide, HKEX announced the launch of Stage in June last year and formally launched the platform in December. Stage, which stands for Sustainable and Green Exchange, is Asia's first multi-asset sustainable investment product platform. We created Stage for three main purposes. First, we want to increase the ESG information flow. Second, to provide a market infrastructure for sustainable asset classes. And third, to provide an alternative to bank finance and private equities for SMEs. At the heart of the Stage platform is an online product repository, which as of today features 49 sustainable theme products from leading Asian corporates. These HKEX listed sustainable products include social bonds, sustainability-linked bonds, green bonds, and other bonds such as transition bonds from issuers across a variety of sectors. We also have ESG-related exchange-traded products. Over time, we hope to increase the scope of the product repository to cover other asset classes in Hong Kong and beyond. Now, issuers included on Stage must provide additional voluntary disclosures on their sustainable investment products, such as the use of proceeds and the annual post-issuance reports. Stage is also an online repository of green and sustainable finance resources. We want to promote market education, knowledge sharing, and stakeholder engagement in building a credible, sustainable finance market. With the launch of Stage, we are seeking to guide future capital flows to support our society's transition towards sustainability. We are therefore actively encouraging all regional issuers to consider application for inclusion on Stage, which is free, which in turn helps to build Asian financial markets' own sustainability. Apart from being a listed corporate, as a market regulator and as an exchange operator, it is our mandate and obligation to ensure that we have a sustainable development of fair, orderly, and informed financial markets. This includes ensuring that companies listed on our exchange disclose both financial and non-financial data. Investors are becoming increasingly aware that financial performance alone is not sufficient in determining the health and prospects of a company. They want a broader, more rounded assessment of risks and opportunities. That includes their approach to governance, environmental factors, their social and community engagement, their commitment to doing business well. Next slide, please. As such, this slide shows you our evolution of the ESG reporting guide. We first introduced the ESG disclosure requirements back in 2013 with a completely voluntary disclosure practice. Then based on market feedback, in 2015, we moved to require every listed company to publish an ESG report. In 2017, we mandated disclosure of all environmental KPIs on a comply or explain basis. Last year, we further amended our listing rules. This is because to help grow the climate finance market, there must be better ESG disclosure. A fundamental change is that we now require a new mandatory statement from the board, setting out the board's consideration of ESG matters. The focus is on board's leadership and accountability of ESG. Next slide, please. We also added a new requirement for our listed companies to disclose relevant targets in relation to environmental KPIs and to disclose their policies on identification and mitigation of significant climate-related issues and the actions taken to manage them. Next slide, please. Last but not least, we upgraded all voluntary disclosure on social KPIs to a comply or explain basis. By keeping the reporting obligation of social KPIs as voluntary, we found that the level of disclosure for social KPIs has been relatively low. This may give the wrong impression that they are less important than environmental KPIs, resulting in less attention being paid by the issuers. Investors and other stakeholders have, in their responses to all our previous ESG consultations, called for an upgrade of the disclosure obligations of social KPIs. Equal treatment of environmental and social risks is also in line with both the UK Stewardship Code and the SFC's Principles of Responsible Ownership, which refers to ESG risks as a whole without singling out environmental risks. These new requirements are consistent with international best practice. The reason for this shift of focus from reporting to mandating a leadership response to ESG is because we believe that it is important for boards to be meaningfully involved in assessing and addressing ESG-related risks, and that companies should not treat ESG as a compliance issue, but to take into account ESG risks and opportunities in their overall corporate strategy. That would also require them to look at the reporting principles, including materiality assessment and reporting boundaries. Because with 2,500 listed companies ranging from global conglomerates to SMEs, we have to have those kinds of reporting boundaries. Thank you.
Thank you, Grace. A very impressive set of initiatives over the years, and especially on the board leadership. I remember that back in 2017, Hong Kong Stock Exchange has already been doing online and offline board training, so getting the board directors ready. And I think you have a very important message there, is that for companies not to think of it as a compliance issue, because in order to do it well, we are talking about doing ESG in spirit and not just in compliance. So very great messages there. And then over to Herry. We look forward to hearing more about your initiatives in Singapore, please.
Sure. Would you be sharing the slides, Chex? So should I share at my end?
Herry, you can feel free to share from your side, or I can help you, whatever you prefer.
Okay. I hope everyone can see the slides.
Yes.
All right. Well, thanks, Grace. I mean, it's really impressive, everything that Hong Kong Exchange is doing. And I think it's like we discussed previously as well, it's ever so important for the exchanges around the region and the world to be talking to each other to ensure that there is harmony and coherence in the way that we promote standards. Good afternoon, everyone, and good morning. My name is Herry. I'm from the Singapore Exchange. Thank you to the organizers for this kind invite too. Just like Grace had done, I wanted to help set the scene a bit further on sustainability reporting. You may be aware that SGX had also launched a comply or explain basis sustainability reporting in June 2016. And there were 5 main components to what needs to be reported. Number 1, material ESG factors. Number 2, on policies, practices, and performance. Thirdly, on the targets. Fourthly, on the sustainability reporting frameworks. And 5thly, on the board statement. In the material ESG factors, it was emphasized that it is important to do a stakeholder engagement to get the inputs on what is actually material for a company. And it was further emphasized that the material factors should have a board oversight and board responsibility. On the policies, practices, and performance front, it was emphasized that a balanced reporting is important, that you don't only showcase what is done well, but also you aim to report on aspects where you need to improve on further, and that should tie up with the targets, which is the third part. Again, this is something that should fall within the board responsibility and emphasize within the guidance as well. On the targets front, it was emphasized that one should look at both risks and opportunities. And for the material factors that have been identified, where possible, there should be targets for the coming year. The sustainability reporting standards and the framework, there was nothing prescriptive, but that one should follow a framework that is globally recognized and can be compared from one year to another. And of course, a board statement to show the responsibilities of the board and their contribution towards a company's overall sustainability oversight. We are starting a consultation in due course to potentially bolster further the climate-related disclosure. And that's something that came through quite strongly in a study that we have been doing. We've just entered into the 2nd year. Unfortunately, that's due out only in May, so it's within the coming weeks. So I can give anecdotally some perspective on that. But within that came really strongly the role of the board, as well as on the climate front, what needs to be done. But going back to the original study with the National University of Singapore, we had launched a report to study the reports that's been disclosed by the company since June 2016, which is a publicly available report as well. And to give you some highlights in those approximately 3 years of reporting, about 99% of the companies complied to publish a sustainability report. And approximately 80% were first-time reporters. So this shows you the power of some guidance from an exchange in ensuring that there is disclosure. Over 95% of the reporting included 5 areas of material environmental factors, the ESG factors, policies, practices, and performance. Looking at the assurance aspect, I think this is where there could certainly be further improvement. Less than 3% of the listed issuers sought external assurance for data verification, and more than 10% had internal assurance. And it says more than 90%, but more like 99% of the companies actually today report using GRI standards. And there are a few that actually only use SASB or both GRI and SASB. So quite interesting set of quantitative factors that are coming out from these types of studies. And if we looked at the most commonly reported material ESG factors, there was more focus in the past years on the social aspect. So the #1 most reported aspect was the occupational health and safety. Alongside the training and education, overall economic performance, diversity and equal opportunities, employment, local community involvement, stroke CSR. On the environmental side, energy usage was the most reported, with effluent and waste and water also showing up. If I just give a small teaser of the upcoming study, which was again done together with the NUN Center for Governance and Sustainability and with KPMG, this upcoming study actually focused on getting a review from the financial institutions on their use of ESG data. And so the report actually then gives the perspective of the financial institutions. 100% of all respondents think sustainability is important for sustainability strategy. They also face difficulties in interpreting the ESG data due to the various reporting frameworks and standards that's in use, and they would like to see some guidance from regulators, but not to be too prescriptive. The environmental disclosures was coming out to be the most important as identified by the financial institutions community, in particular around carbon emissions. And so this also is what directs us towards a consultation around climate-related disclosures. And that overwhelmingly, they feel that the board oversight is very important, as well as coming up with increasingly more quantitative targets. I'm going to skip a couple of slides in the interest of time, but this one perhaps is interesting just to share. Now, I did mention that in the reporting guidance itself, we did ask companies to disclose not only favorable aspects, but also unfavorable aspects as well. Whilst there was higher percentage of companies who were mostly disclosing favorable aspects, we hope that a balanced perspective that shows the improvements over time would increase and would certainly help to steer the market that way. Furthermore, we noted that most of the companies, as seen in the bottom right graph, had focused on long-term targets. And of course, there were very short-term targets as indicated as guidance by us. What financial institutions would like to see, as shown by the study, and also then further support from us, would be how can you break down this long-term target into something that is practicable and actionable, that provides a mid-term view, a short-term view that can be tracked and disclosed over time. So with that, just a short overview on some of the key way that we're looking at sustainability and sustainable finance. We stand to support sustainable finance and transition, which is, of course, eminently important in this part of the world, with trusted products, solutions, and support for the ecosystem. Like Grace had mentioned, we are a company ourselves as well. So we strive to adopt the best practices and highest international standards. What you see as the market infrastructure is a business for us as well. And within each of those business asset classes, and within SGX, we're a multi-asset class exchange. So not only do we have equities, we also offer derivatives, fixed income, commodities, FX, indices, and other strategic projects that are ongoing at this point in time. Of course, the role as a regulator is always very clear. We will look to support the market, but also steer the market in terms of regulations that we think will future-proof and support the market. And overall in the ecosystem, what is that role that we can play, I think is perhaps the most important in this bucket. And all of the three other pillars should absolutely support how we support the ecosystem. So how can we be a positive influence, foster collaboration, partnerships, P2P sharing, and provide tools and data and resources for connecting the stakeholders in the global markets. We also do have a specific site dedicated to sustainability, first.sgx.com, which stands for Future in Reshaping Sustainability Together. There's wealth of resources there, as well as further information in everything that we do. And we're continuously adding further knowledge and insights there, so do tune in. Perhaps I'll pause there. Back to you, Christine.
Thank you very much, Herry. Very interesting. I really like the way you mentioned the issues, like such as, okay, so social performance. Yes, it has gone up last year, but what was it? You know, was it training and education, occupational health and safety? And this is really important as a message from exchanges because of the fact that ESG has become such a hot potato or like hot issue. Many people have jumped on it and give it a label all the time. So ESG becomes, I think I've mentioned previously in another occasion, if we talk about ESG as a label, it's like talking about Ben & Jerry's ice cream being Netflix and chill or Chunky Monkey. And if we only think of it as a label, slowly people do not know what they are eating because they don't look at what is underneath. So it's great that you mentioned what is actually included in that. And another topic that jumped out again is the board responsibility. And I want to move on to the Q&A session now, and there are a couple of questions, but I really want to start with the board responsibility because it's a very clear message from both Grace and Herry yourself. So IIGCC, the Institutional Investor on Climate Change, has just announced this week that they have another new initiative, an investor expectation. And it's very clear on that investor expectation from banks that they want remuneration committee to be involved. They want audit committee to be involved. They want specific responsibility from boards, members. And in general, in Asia, access by investors to board members is still relatively limited compared to, say, in Europe or in the UK. What are your key messages to your issuers on board level leadership and their engagement responsibility with investors? Can I ask you to start off with that one? And then I'll move on to some questions that are popping up. Thank you.
I'm happy to start first. I believe our approach is also very similar to Singapore Stock Exchange. You know, I think the board has the responsibility and accountability on the overall corporate strategy. And as a result, they can't just get away by not giving directions to the management. So we at the exchange have issued a guide for directors as to how they can lead on the ESG discussions with their management. You know, in the past, people really saw ESG report as corporate social responsibility and looking at just, you know, disclosing, you know, kind of the volunteer hours by employees and the amount of donations. But these are not things that investors are most interested in. Investors are interested in how you know, and in what the ESG risks the companies are facing, and how they are addressing those risks. So I think, you know, for the disclosure to be useful, decision useful to investors, issuers must spend time to look at the overall ESG risks and opportunities of the companies and the operations, and then to incorporate that into their overall corporate strategy.
Yeah, and if I may add to that, I mean, TCFD really is clear it's going to be adopted on a global basis. You know, even the convergence standards, the convergence of the standards, the starting point is climate-related disclosures, right? One way to potentially further really embed sustainability into the processes themselves is, for example, climate-related risks should be firmly as part of the overall risk management discussions and risk appetite that companies can take or allowed to take. That needs to be quantified over time. And depending on the sector and how material that is for your sector, it also should be that there should be quantitative scenario planning and the actions that one should take. This is not something that can be undertaken overnight. That is very, very clear. But the board needs to have an oversight in this whole process. And companies need to come up with a roadmap as to how they will undertake that and how they actually not only inform boards, but actually involve the boards in this whole discussion. So maybe that's something to add to what Grace had said.
And one more point, Christine, just to address the communication and access to directors. We have always promoted the importance of stakeholder engagement. In order for you to know, as Herry just said, materiality. In order for you to really understand, what is material to your investors, you have to see, and hear from the investors what they are looking for in terms of your ESG disclosures. And so for us, we have recently launched yet another consultation to enhance our corporate governance code, specifically in the areas of communications with investors, corporate culture, as well as directors' independence, because all of these things I think are what investors care about, and they want to see that how these companies are managing such governance and oversight of ESG matters, and communications remains important. Thank you.
Absolutely, the message is very clear. We look forward to, I'm sure that's going to have an impact on the behavior of issuers. So let's move on to the questions, make sure that they get answered. So the first one is it possible to quantify the effects of carbon disclosure? And when studying the act of voluntary disclosure, how do we rule out self-selection bias? And I think it also relates to something that we've been talking about on greenwashing as well. So any insights on that, and how can exchanges help to alleviate concerns of greenwashing from investors?
Yeah, Herry, do you want to start?
Sure. I don't mind starting. So, I mean, that's a complex question, but maybe I can break it down into one example in the indices world, right? Which is obviously a tool that investors use when they look at a group of companies that fit certain criteria, whether that be from geographic perspective or ratings perspective, etc. Now, on the indices front, it is the ESG overlay in indices is something that's been growing exponentially, as well as the passive investments that track the indices. We have a subsidiary called Scientific Beta, which actually originated from an academic institution in France. And one thing that they've really been championing is ensuring that any indices, we really should focus on climate impact, right? And what that means is you have to be very, very clear on what kind of data gets included, for example, scope 1 and 2, And because scope 3, there's significant inconsistencies and just simply lack of data out there. So they've been promoting, as part of their climate impact consistent indices, the inclusion of only scope 1 and 2, and scope 3 because it is so important, there should be further research from all parties, right? Rather than just including it when it's apple and pears and hard to actually compare. Furthermore, the indices that they suggest also penalizes companies who do not disclose around their emissions footprint. So there will be other investors who are looking at this closely and actually penalize companies that over time are not making transparent on their footprint and impact. And again, over time, not only of their own company, but the impact and the influence that they're having, if they have a lot of influence on the supply chain, both downstream and upstream overall. So the focus on data, the raw data, the comparability of data goes to the heart of ensuring there is no greenwashing. And the EU standards by the European Commission for investors to actually have to disclose, right, on the Sustainable Finance Disclosure Directive, right? It also clearly says that whatever says green on the tin has to be green, right? So if you say that you have a tilt towards ESG in any way, then you have to be very, very clear what that actually is. So I think there'll be combination of regulation, but also academia, the indices setters, the creators of products have a big role to play in ensuring that there is clear backup to what a claim that's being made.
Great. Grace, any?
I agree everything Herry just said. Maybe from greenwashing perspective, I will speak from the green finance perspective. So part of the purpose of setting up Stage that I mentioned earlier is to require these issuers with green bonds, social bonds to publish an annual report, which is additional voluntary information by these issuers, so that investors can see where the money has been spent and also the potential and actual environmental impact or societal impact. So this is important. The other risk of greenwashing obviously is, we have an issuer having a couple of projects that are green, but the overall strategy of the issue is actually continue to pollute the environment. Then I also see that as greenwashing. So our latest amendments to the listing rules to have the board involved in the overall ESG risks and to have that incorporated in the overall corporate strategy is important. And I think in terms of disclosure, I think the whether people will just disclose the good things and not the bad things. Now we have reporting principles, namely the materiality, quantitative, and consistency. So we do require issuers cannot just choose the best things to report and not has to be following these disclosure principles. If something's material to you, you have to disclose. There's no more voluntary disclosure. Is a comply or explain standard. Thank you.
Thank you. And of course, the next greenwashing discussion would be at the investment product side. Then we have to bring in more securities regulator, probably for another day. So on to the next question. Especially for Herry, this one, the Singapore Stock Exchange survey places corporate ethics in an important position, as well as the climate or E-related performance. Do you feel that that's because a tipping point has been reached, that we're finally, trying to address the social side of performance, which is in general seem to be historically more difficult to quantify? Are we really trying to give that a go now? What should be the outlook for this?
Yeah, so the stance that's been taken from our side has been clear from the very beginning, and actually explains what we stand for. There's zero tolerance for corruption. And that's why, in the context of preventing corruption, the companies to disclose how they are ethically behaving has been a key focus for us. So it's really a governance question. How is a company organized internally? What kind of checks and balances do they have to ensure that there is no corruption? So it goes to also what Singapore stands for as a country, to have to create a legal system that is stable and stands for anti-corruption. And that also feeds through into the rules of the exchange as well. And I think the companies that choose to list here, if we talk to companies during pre-IPO stage, when they're going from a private entity to a public entity, they very much so value what being listed on SGX stands for, because of that hard stance that had been taken on ethics, the corporate ethics part, and they seek guidance as to what needs to be done to ensure that they're world class. And so it's a systemic change that we're looking to drive on that front, and something that companies who are listed here and all companies that's operating across the multi-asset classes pride in.
Thank you, Herry. And of course, then the social emphasis is not limited to the survey. There's also reflected in the Hong Kong Stock Exchange guides and step up as well. Grace, would you like to say a few things on the social performance and the
you know, in terms of social performance, I think, you know, we will soon see the disclosures from companies. What we care about really, it's diversity as well. We want to be able to end single gender board, for example, and also I think the you know, human rights and child labor, forced labor, you know, these things are also important, in addition to the anti-corruption that Herry mentioned. Again, having a whistleblowing policy, for example, it's also fundamental. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think I've just been warned that we have 5 minutes left. So as a moderator, I'm going to take my privilege and try to pick and choose questions. So sorry about that. I'm going to pick one that is, I think it's from a corporate, a very heartfelt kind of question from a corporate. So here it is, the question. The reality to date is the costs, resources, and even the appropriate talent know-how needed to obtain data points. How do we square this before we can run? That is then to transition strategies and business models and identifying risks and opportunities. It's really very hard for a small listed company to achieve that. Please give me more guidance.
Very happy to do that, because we have been providing a lot of resources on the HKEX website. There's a dedicated page for small companies to learn how to do the ESG reports. We have guides for the preparers as well as for the directors. We have e-training and webcasts to show you how to do it. And we have, you know, carbon calculators, water calculators, etc., etc. Because we do recognize that there is a big difference in terms of resources between smaller companies and bigger companies. And we have 2,500 companies. And so we must be able to address those issues, and we are there to help the smaller companies to report.
Yes, so I think indeed that capacity building part to help, and there are, you know, if you look at the absolute number of companies that's listed on the exchange, the SMEs, the small caps, the mid caps, the absolute number, maybe not the size, even the total size, but the number of companies, you know, kind of overtakes the number of large companies disproportionately. And, you know, it's a question that we also get quite often as well. So, of course, we also provide reporting guidance. There's online training that's freely available for all. But I'd like to put it this way, and this comes through when we've been also very busy looking at us as an exchange's overall direction. And there are three things that really come out when we think about what do we need to do, and what are, you know, then and how do we categorize the activities and prioritize what we need to do. Number one I think it is inevitable that a lot of changes that need to happen in Asia that needs to be funded, that takes a lion's share. Numerous statistics show that, right? That the changes and the funding needs to happen here. So how do we ensure that not only the exchanges like Hong Kong Exchange and SGX, we become leaders on this globally to support the ecosystem? The second part, which is the harder part to track down in many ways, and this goes to the heart of what the question says, is future-proofing. If there are certain things that we don't do today, you may not see a change and it may seem like a cost, but 3 years down the line, 2 years down the line, 5 years down the line, depending on the topic, if you haven't done it, you're going to lose market share. You're going to lose the ability to supply to some of the larger MNCs. You're going to lose a revenue stream as a result of that. And so that's the part that ideally needs to be quantified better. And that's what standards like TCFD really help with, because it provides a framework for a company to look at. What do you need to focus on to ensure that you don't actually lose market share and lose revenues in the future? We know that the discussion, when we talk about scope 3, I'm sure most people dialed into this call are people who are well aware of what scope 1 to 3 is. But scope 3, which is emissions that really focuses on anything outside of your immediate control within your value chain, the sectoral value chain, there's increasing focus on large MNCs at this point. Depending on the sector, it is more prominent than others. To say we want to know and be able to trace that our suppliers are also adhering to the policies and standards that we want to upkeep over time. And so for the SMEs, who are very often the suppliers to these larger MNCs, whether it is local or regional or global, it is important that you start to look at it, take it step by step. You don't have to do everything in one go, but talk to experts, talk to your peers to understand what is coming first, right? Break things down and start to educate yourself as well as your board. If you need help, you can also, if you're listed, then reach out to your exchange as well. There's, always a plethora of tools available. We can always direct you to the right direction. But there are certain hotspots, depending on the sector that you're in, where you're really going to have to future-proof. If you don't do that, you're at risk of losing revenue or market share in the future. And if you don't start to consider it today and take step by step, you may not know what bus came to hit you a few years down the line.
Thank you very much. I've been worn out. We're coming up to the hour. Thank you so much for two of our distinguished guests today. The messages are loud and clear. We need board involvement. We need to engage at the issue level in order to avoid greenwashing or SDG washing or any other type of washing that we don't want. We would like companies to take control of the narrative and understand their whole ecosystem, how they can engage along the value chain so that they are prepared for tomorrow. What is seen, it seems to be a cost today is an investment for the future to defend the market position and to grow it. So thank you very much. Any unanswered questions, please go back to Enrico, who has just appeared. So please go back to him for any answers for the questions that unfortunately I don't have time to answer. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, everyone, for
Thank you,
very,
Christine.
very
Thank you,
interesting
Herry.
session.
Thank you.